All right, well, it's past time. Let's go ahead and let's get started. Today, we'll see if we can do this. We're going to try to get through Genesis 26 through 30. We'll see how that all goes. My wife told me last week that I had spent way too much time summarizing all of this stuff. Thank you, Carol. I will. She is. She's very helpful with these kinds of things. So. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together this morning again in your house to sit at the feet of your word as we continue to go through this journey in Genesis. We ask you to guide us as we look at Isaac and Esau and Jacob and all of the dysfunction that is in these families. And yet your love and your promise continues to run through them all. Help us and guide us in our discussion and in our contemplation. We ask this in your name. Amen. Before we get into that, and this is always sort of what gets me into trouble, is the asides. I thought I would just share a little bit about, there was a question last week related to Ishmael and the rise of Islam. And I think it might be helpful maybe just to look at this a little bit. We know that Abraham, his firstborn son, was Ishmael, and that was with Hagar, Sarah's servant. Tradition has it that Ishmael's descendants lead into Islam, that's where Islam comes from. And what's interesting about the three major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is that they interface, they intersect at a number of points. And it's just really sort of interesting, because all three of these religions trace their roots back to Abraham. Christianity and Judaism comes through Isaac. Islam traces it back through Ishmael. So there are three holy sites in Islam, and this is the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. The first one is Mecca. The second one is Medina. It's believed that actually the Prophet Muhammad is buried in Medina. That's what makes that site significant. And then Jerusalem. You can see that up in the board up there. We need to figure out sizing on this. Okay. So, in Mecca, we've got this grand mosque that is there. It's a huge mosque. And in the center of it, there is what is known as the Kaaba. It's a cube. It's about 50 foot square. And you can see in this grand mosque, this isn't sized very well for the screen today, but as you can see, the Kaaba is this very sacred space that Islam believes that actually this dates back to Adam and Eve, and that Abraham takes Ishmael, and they go to Mecca, and they reconstruct this building. That's how Islam sort of connects this into the Ishmael thing. So what Islam does is that they have what is known as the Hajj. And the Hajj is a pilgrimage that happens every year. And if you are a Muslim, you are required, if you can afford it, to actually go to Mecca, go to Saudi Arabia, and experience this. It's a week long, and as you can see up there in the board, it's June 26th. This year was June 26th to July 1st. And so they go to Mecca, and they will go around this cube 7 times. That's the pilgrimage. I mean, it's a prayerful time, a reflective time. And you can see by this, I mean, just look at, hundreds of thousands of folks that go here. It's just incredible in terms of how large Islam is. And then inside this Kaaba, that was a question last week, I think, that Roy had asked about what was inside this box. Well, this is the inside picture of the Kaaba. And the Kaaba has been rebuilt a number of times over the millennia. And there's 3 pillars. There's a variety of plaques that are around this. It's Islamic Quran inscriptions. There looks like there's a table there. It's sort of like an altar, but it's more of a mini mosque that's been existing for many, many centuries. What's interesting about the Kaaba is that there's this black stone that's in that silver oval. And you can see the door. This is the door to the Kaaba. So it's not really used as a worship center. They go in there a couple of times a year to sort of clean it out, but it's not, people just walk around it. And what's important about the Kaaba is that the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have had his first revelations from the Archangel Gabriel here. That's why this space exists, is that this seems to be, according to Muhammad, where he first started to get revelations from Allah, from God, through Gabriel. But this black stone that exists over here is believed by Muslims to actually have been dropped by God from heaven to Adam and Eve to guide them. And it's Muhammad in the 700s who actually takes that stone and embeds this into this structure. It's just fascinating to look at different religions, but particularly Islam, because it's so large. But it traces its roots back very similar to what our roots are with Abraham. And it's just interesting to sort of connect it together. There is a third sacred site for Islam, and that is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is located on Temple Mountain in Jerusalem. This is the Temple Mountain. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is huge. It is believed to be where Muhammad, again, was taken by God, by Allah, and he had this communication with the angel Gabriel. So this is the third most sacred site in Islam. The Temple of Solomon likely existed right in here. So you can see the intersection between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam on Temple Mountain. It's sacred to 3 religions. The Dome of the Rock, which is located up here, the Dome of the Rock is believed to be built over the rock where Abraham was told by God to sacrifice Isaac. Underneath the dome, there's this huge rock. I was in there. It's just incredible. But that's believed to be where this sacred place is, where Isaac was supposed to be sacrificed by Abraham. And for Jews, this would have been the location where the temple would have existed. So on top of it today, you've got 2 Muslim sites. So for Jews, they've got what's known as the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is outside Temple Mountain. It's over on the side of Temple Mountain. And this is the Wailing Wall. A lot of these stones date back to King Herod the Great. So they're a couple of millennia old. You've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which has a capacity, actually, the surrounds of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they can get about 400,000 people in there. It's just incredible how large this thing is. And then the Dome of the Rock. So this is a very sacred space for 3 monotheistic religions.
Did Islam, don't they say that Abraham went to that rock to offer Ishmael?
Yes, there is, yes, because they're tracing their lineage through Ishmael. So yes, Ishmael is the one that they're paying attention to. We pay attention to Abraham and Isaac. Yep. So it's interesting, too, to note that the calendars for both Judaism and Islam are similar. Both of them follow years that are the calendar that's based upon the moon cycle. So their months start in the middle of our months. We're on the Julian calendar. Islam is on its own separate calendar that follows moon cycle, and so is Judaism. They follow their own cycle. So right now, we're on the 23rd of July. That's the 5th day of the first month of the new year for Islam. And they are in the year 1445, which dates back to when Muhammad began his ministry, when Islam sort of started. So if you go to Judaism, which I've always found is an incredibly complicated calendar to follow, is that their cycle is also on the moon cycle. We are in the 5th month for Judaism, because their year begins right around the time Passover happens. And we are in the year 5,783, because they trace their calendar back to the beginning of the world. By working through the Old Testament, the generations, and that's how they get to 5783. So it's just sort of interesting how these intersect. Because I think for Christians, we sort of put Islam out there as this weird side thing out there that has this huge amount of believers. But quite honestly, there's a lot of intersection points between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And it might be actually interesting sometime to have a study on comparative religions, because I think a lot of times people just like to know what some of the differences are between the different religions. This actually might be one that might be worth doing. Okay, so we are in Genesis 26 today. Abraham's dead, he's been buried, so we are done with him. We've gone through these things related to Abraham. We've had the death and burial of Sarah. We've found Abraham has purchased some land because he wanted this cave or a couple of caves to bury his wife in. Isaac marries Rebekah. Remember, Abraham wanted to find a wife for his son Isaac, and he didn't want that wife to come from the Canaanites, which we find today that Esau, who is just sort of ornery, decides that he's going to take Canaanite wives. And he's going to bug Isaac and Rebekah. So Abraham dies. He's buried there in the cave. We've got the birth of Esau and Jacob. And then Esau sells his birthright, which was the message for today. I printed out for you the genealogy of Terah, which I know it's hard to see up there on the screen, so you've got that here now. And hopefully that will be a little bit helpful to see how everything is sort of interconnected in this family. We know that the promise is coming through Terah to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. And then we'll get into this today. Jacob has 4 wives in the end. And it's an interesting story of how all of that takes place. But the promise that was made to Abraham will go through Judah, who is a son who came through Leah. It is Rachel that I believe that Jacob really loved. I think that was love at first sight, if you read Genesis that way. And that Rachel will have Joseph, which I have a feeling helps explain a little bit of the hatred that the other brothers had for him, because Jacob seems to love Joseph more than the others. And I think it's just because I love Rachel. And this is her firstborn son. And the sad part, of course, is that Rachel will give birth to the last son out of the 12, Benjamin, and she'll die in childbirth. And that's just sort of the sad ending to Rachel. But these other 2 women, Zilpah and Bilhah, those are servants of these 2, of Leah and Rachel. And we have a similar situation that happens with Sarah, who decides, well, God is saying, we're going to have a big family, and it doesn't seem to be happening. So Abraham, why don't you take my servant, and why don't you have a kid by that? That's exactly what seems to be happening here too. So it's an interesting dysfunctional family that we follow through with Abraham all the way through. And I've always figured, Abraham always seems to be somewhat normal. That as you get farther and farther into Abraham's descendants, they get stranger and stranger. They have more problems all the time. And it's clear that Jacob is very much a conniving, deceitful, and his mother plays into this. I mean, that's what's sort of interesting in this whole thing today. So, Yes.
That's probably why he has more sons as Leah.
Yes. And she was very fertile, apparently, so, yeah. So Ishmael, again, right here, who came from Hagar, had 12 children as well, and that's where Islam traces its roots. So its patriarch is Abraham and Ishmael, and then the descendants. And for Christianity and Judaism, ours is Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. Okay, so we know that Abraham was originally from this area, likely in southern Mesopotamia, in southern Iraq. Abraham settles over in the area of Hebron. That's where the family sort of plants itself. And we know that whenever they seem to want wives, they head north. And they go up to Abraham's brother's area, and that's where both Isaac and Jacob will get their wives. Okay, I think we are going to get to, this is chapter 26. Okay, so Abraham seemed to navigate around Hebron, which is just south of Jerusalem. And Isaac seems to go farther south in this wilderness area down here. We pick the story up in Genesis 26, and there's a famine. Another famine, another drought. Remember what happens when Abraham comes to the land of Canaan. There is a famine. And God told Abraham, actually, stay put, I'll take care of you. What did Abraham do? Packed up the bags and went to Egypt. And that's where they pick up Hagar, who enters into service with Sarah. Remember, that's where the situation was that Abraham, his wife Sarah was so beautiful that if they think I'm married to you, they might kill me to take you. So that's where he was pawning her off as a sister. We got a similar situation that happens at the Isaac side, because he'll do the same thing with Rebekah. So there is a drought, and Isaac, in chapter 26, goes over to this area. This area right here would be associated with the Gaza Strip today. So the Gaza Strip, which is between Egypt and Israel, that strip of land is generally where the Philistines lived. And that's what we're interfacing with in chapter 26. We're with the Philistines. They'll either be called the Canaanites, but I see in the translations here, they're picking up the Philistine side, Abimelech. Okay, so chapter 26, we're on that, page 1 on the handout. Now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. So we have some years here, about 80 years that have passed. We got another famine that comes through. This is not uncommon in the Middle East. Rain is not something that happens a lot. Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. So that's where Gerar is at. It's close to where the Gaza Strip is located at today. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I'm going to tell you about. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. That's verse 3. It is really one of the things that's testing Isaac's faith. There's a famine. Don't do what Abraham did. Don't run to Egypt. Stay here. I'll take care of you. And in fact, I'm going to give you this land. And I have to say with Isaac and sort of the dysfunction of the family 2.0 is that Isaac listens. He stays there. And so what this chapter 26 is about is that wherever Isaac seems to go and they dig for water, they get water. God's taking care of him. And in fact, he becomes rich in chapter 26, largely because he is with the Philistines, and whatever he does seems to be successful. And what would you expect the Philistines to react to that. They're not happy. That's our water. You dug this well on our land. That's our water. Okay, so we go through here in verse 4. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Well, of course, that's the promise that God gave to Abraham. And so you've got, again, Abraham's dead, buried. Isaac's now the leader of the clan. And so God is directly working through him and I think developing his faith, his relationship with God. This is the promise I made with your father. This is the promise I've made with you. Do you believe me? Because that's what it comes down to. I give you the promise, but do you believe me? Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Will you be like your father? Will you believe me? In verse 6, so Isaac settled in Gerar, where the men of the place asked him about his wife. And lo and behold, it must be actually sort of the DNA of the family. Oh, she's my sister. I love it. I mean, it's repeated a couple of times. I mean, this isn't just a one-offer. This is a couple of times that this happens. And what I find fascinating with this, because we've always looked at the Philistines as being this barbaric, I mean, the Philistine reputation in the Old Testament is not good, because the Philistines are always the ones that are, when the children of Israel actually do settle into the Promised Land, they seem to always be the ones that are just constantly on the Jews. So he feared my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. And when he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac. The translation here is laughing, but actually in Hebrew, what's happening here is he's caressing her. There's an intimacy that is not sister. So, in verse 9, what does Abimelech confront him with? It's your wife, isn't it? And Isaac comes clean. Yeah, that is my wife. And he explains to him in verse 9, I did this because I was afraid of you guys. Verse 10, Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought and would have brought guilt upon us. Interesting morality, isn't it? You wouldn't think that actually would cross anybody's mind. I mean, if you were scared of the fact that they were simply going to kill me so that they can take Rebekah, Abimelech seems to be concerned about that there might have been a relationship outside of marriage. I wouldn't have expected the Philistines to be that way. Verse 11, so Abimelech warned all the people, stay away from this woman. In fact, stay away from these folks. They seem to be trouble. Verse 12, and Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year. Remember, it's a famine. He's been blessed 100-fold. Numbers always mean something in the Bible. A lot of times they're very symbolic. Number 7, number 10 seems to be numbers of completeness. When something lasts, because we'll find out when Jacob goes up north and he wants to marry Rachel, and in the end he ends up with Leah first, is that he sort of agreed to work 7 years. 7 is a number of completeness, so whether it was literally 7 or a period of time, we don't necessarily know. The Lord blessed him completely. In verse 13, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became filthy rich, very wealthy. That leads to envy, because the Philistines aren't happy what's taking place. In verse 14, it says, the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines, what were they doing in verse 15? They were filling up the wells. So Abraham had built wells. He had dug wells. And quite honestly, again, in Israel, if you strike water, that's that's a prize. I mean, it's hard to get water in Israel. So Abraham dug some wells. He had water. It was showing God was on my side. He's blessing us. So when Abraham dies, the Philistines decide to go back and fill in the wells. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, why you wouldn't just use the wells, but they filled them in. So what happens when Isaac comes along, some years later, they redig the wells. I don't know why or how they would have known where they were at, but whatever the case is, verse 16, Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away. Get out of here. You're a problem." And so Isaac backed up a little ways. He went into the valley, in verse 17, the valley of Gerar, and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father gave to them. And when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen from Gerar, the Philistines, came and said, "That's our water. That's our water." So he called the name of the well Esk. And what the names are sort of descriptors of what sort of the circumstance was. I mean, names become very descriptive in the Old Testament. Verse 21, there's a quarrel that breaks out among them. And so they have to back up a little bit farther. And they're away from the Philistine territory. So they go over more to the eastern side. They would have probably gone closer to Beersheba in this area here. And now they were away from the Philistines. And so the Philistines are okay with all of this. They back up to Beersheba in verse 23. On page number 2, God reiterates in verse 24 the promise that he made to Abraham. And that's, I think, in chapter 26, that's sort of what God is trying to do with Isaac, is that I've made a covenant, I've made an agreement, I'm going to take care of you. Trust me on this. And there's got to be these test moments to see whether or not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, are you going to trust me? The famine comes. Are you going to trust me? Just stay here. I'll take care of you. And so this is a lesson that I think is coming back to Isaac. So in verse 26, when Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and he took along his counselors and advisor, Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" And verse 28, why did they come to visit him in verse 28? What was their conclusion? They've watched Isaac and the family. Your God is strong. It isn't the fact that they're coming to believe in Isaac's God. We're sort of scared of your God. Get out of here. But more so, we want to make an agreement with you. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. They're not coming to faith. They're simply recognizing that Isaac's God, whatever he believes in, is more powerful than their gods. They see that. But there is no conversion. I mean, the Philistines will stay with their gods. I find verse 34 and 35 a fascinating appendage to this chapter. Out of the blue, because we've been talking now here about Isaac and his experiences during the famine. The last two verses of chapter 26, verse 34, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, a Canaanite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, a Canaanite. And they did what? They made Jacob, his life miserable. Interesting, isn't it? You got this story about Isaac and water and all this famine stuff, and then the last couple of verses. Oh, by the way, the family really is dysfunctional. Because you've got Esau now, who has intentionally married somebody that Isaac wouldn't have wanted, or Rebekah, and they gang up on her in particular. And it would make some sense, wouldn't it? Because Esau knows exactly what is unfolded. Rebekah loves Isaac and loves Jacob, and Isaac loves Esau. And there's the tension that exists in this family. Chapter 26. This is the strange story of the blessing that Isaac gives to Jacob. In the message today, the sermon today, there's really two parts to the story here. One is we've already gone through in chapter 25. It was Esau sort of selling the birthright to his brother Jacob because he was hungry. That's part one. Part two is the blessing. It's sort of sealing the relationship that now you're going to be the head of the clan. So the birthright, in some respects, was saying as the oldest son, you are entitled to twice as much as the rest of the family would get, and you will become the head of the clan. But the blessing at the end of Isaac's life would have been, it's yours now. The family will serve you. And they need to hear that from Isaac. So this birthright thing is sort of a two-parter. And so I have a feeling that in chapter 25, when Esau sells the birthright, or essentially gives the birthright to his brother Jacob, is that Esau may have felt that, really, what difference does it make because I'm actually stronger than you? He was the hunter. I mean, wasn't Jacob sort of mama's boy sitting around the tent? If I were to look at those two individuals, I would have thought that if they had a fight, Esau would win. Sure, I'll give you whatever you want. Just feed me. Just feed me. And so when it came down to the blessing, my guess is that Esau did not see it coming, that he was going to lose it. Because in the end, Dad loves me. And in the end, I'm stronger than you, Jacob. I'll get it. And so this is the story. This is real dysfunction here. And it's the conniving between Rebekah and Jacob. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, so he's becoming blind in some respects. And Isaac actually is going to live a lot more years yet. So this isn't a deathbed thing. He called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son," and he answered, "Here I am. Behold, I am old, I do not know the days of my death. Now then, take your weapons and your quiver and your bow and go out to the field and hunt game for me and prepare for me delicious food such as I love and bring it to me so that I may eat and that my soul may bless you before I die." Let's sort of sign the agreement that you're the next in line. Let's finish sort of the movement of the inheritance to you. Verse 5, who is eavesdropping but Mom, Rebekah? And you get an insight into Rebekah now. Now, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And again, these are tents. This isn't the fact that, there's walls and stuff. I mean, this is a tent. And maybe multiple, you can hear what's going on around here. So it isn't the fact that, gee, what a surprise that she heard. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I'm going to tell you exactly what Dad's going to do, and this is our plan. This is our plan. Verse 8, now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. We're going to get that birthright. Now remember, remember when Rebekah was pregnant, and of course she had twins. Remember, there was battling that was going on between the two while in the womb. Remember, she had sort of talked to God, and God explained to her that ultimately the younger would dominate the older. She knew that. So I don't know if that's part of what the plotting is here. We're going to make sure this thing comes true. But her love for Jacob is very clear. She wants Jacob to have the blessing. She wants Jacob to become head of the clan. This is, in some respects, playing into what she knows from God. I don't think she ever disclosed that information to Isaac. So, verse 11, but Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is, well, he doesn't quite look like me. So how am I going to pull this off? I mean, Esau is hairy. In fact, he's also red. Well, Dad's blind, so he couldn't actually see whether or not he's red. But how about the hairy thing? And this is sort of the plotting that goes on here. I mean, she says, well, we'll take the skins of the animals and we'll put it on your arms, and on your chest. And so if Isaac is going to touch you, he'll feel the hair. I mean, Esau must have been really hairy, whatever the case is. But we'll disguise you. So the whole thing is set up here is as this. We're going to trick Dad into giving you the birthright. So if you go to page 3, beginning of verse 18. So he went into his father and said, my father, and he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Which I would have thought that Esau and Jacob would have had different voices. But Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat my game, that your soul may bless me. How did Isaac respond to all of this? Saying, boy, that's quick. You got out there and you got the game and you've cooked it up already, and here you are. Wow, it's a miracle. What I find really interesting in verse 21, then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau. I think Isaac actually was always suspicious of Jacob and his conniving. And he distrusted, I believe, Jacob. I don't know if it's really you. Are you trying to trick me? So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Are you really my son? Are you really Esau? And the lie is in verse 24. Yeah, I am. It gives you some insight into Esau and Jacob in terms of the conniving that was going on. Then he said, bring it near to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it near to him, he ate, and he brought him wine and he drank. And so as a result of this, Isaac apparently seems to believe that this is indeed Esau, and here comes the blessing. This is sort of, the deal now is sealed. When Dad gives the blessing, the final blessing to his son, that's not something that gets undone. When the ink is done, when you sign the document in some respects, it's over. It's done. This is the blessing in verse 27. See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, prosperity, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. Which raises an interesting question. Did they have other kids besides these two? And may your mother's sons bow down to you. That was really sort of this point of the blessing. You're now going to be the head of the family. Now that's a big loss there. Whether Esau was all upset about an extra share of the money, I don't really care about. But whether it really was all about who was in control, who was going to be the head of the clan, yeah, that one probably is an important one. So lo and behold, in verse 30, the end of verse 30, who would come through the door but Esau? It's a movie. It's just like a movie could be written. Verse 31, he also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, let my father arise and eat. And verse 32, Isaac is saying, well, who are you? Well, actually, Isaac, you probably could guess what has taken place here. I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau. In verse 33, then Isaac trembled very violently. I would think so, actually. This may have been something where he thought he could, with Rebekah's help, get the blessing and then sort of get out of town or get away from Esau. But lo and behold, Esau would have to be in the room with him. Verse 34, as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, so Isaac recognizes this, and has taken away your blessing. And it's not something we can change. Esau says, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. Actually, the name Jacob sort of implies somebody who cheats, who deceives. That's part of what the name is. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him lord over you and all of his brothers. I passed on the head of the clanship to him, and there's nothing we can do about it. Isaac has come to that recognition. In verse 39, at the bottom of the page and over the top of the next page, is the blessing that Isaac does give to Esau. And in verse 40, that's sort of the crux of it. You're going to work hard to make a living, but in the end, you're going to serve your brother. He's the head. Verse 41, now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, well, and one would expect this to come. Wait till Dad dies. I'll kill you. And lo and behold, Rebekah, who seems to be an eavesdropper, hears about what goes on and tells her son in verse 43, get out of town. And where is he going to flee to? Her brother's house. We've been there before, haven't we? Because that's how Isaac got his wife. It was Rebekah. Flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran. Stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away. Really? Do you think it's going to go away? I think she was a little bit optimistic here. Give it some time. He'll be okay with this. Yeah, that will be. Verse 46, another interesting ending to a chapter. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of whom? Those 2 Hittite women who are married to Esau. And I don't know what they were doing to Rebekah, but apparently Rebekah's life was miserable because of it. In some respects, when you get to chapter 28, Jacob gets what's coming to him, in some respects. because this whole thing about Jacob fleeing north to go to Haran to have the safety of Rebekah's brother's home, and he finds his wife because he wants to marry Rachel, is that he's tricked by Laban. He doesn't get Rachel right away. So Jacob, you get treated a little bit the way that you were treating your brother. I find chapter 28 interesting. And maybe part of this end of chapter 27, where Rebekah is complaining to Isaac about the Hittite women, maybe this is part of God's punishment to Rebekah. I don't know. Chapter 28. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Don't do what your brother did. Arise, go up to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban and your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you." It's clear that Isaac had come to a point of understanding that this is the pathway now. Jacob, you're going to be the one who's going to carry the family name. You're the one through whom the blessing is going to go. The blessing that God gave to Abraham that was passed on to me, and I passed it on to you. You're going to become a great nation. So he sent out and went away. We have in verses 6 through 9, Jacob saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, and in verse 8, so when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, what did Esau do? It wasn't enough just to have two women. Who does he go to but Ishmael? Goes to Ishmael in verse 9, and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, a woman who again would not be one that the family wanted. Gives you an insight into Esau. He's not particularly good either. Jacob has this dream in verse 10 where he is in Bethel. Bethel was one of the places that Abraham had stopped in when he came down from Syria into Canaan. He stopped at Bethel and he prayed there. On Jacob's journey north to go to Haran, he stops at Bethel as well, and he has this dream. And this dream is simply about the angel. He sees this ladder in this dream, and he's going to have, there's going to be more dreams about all of this, but he sees this dream of the angels going up and down. And essentially, it's a confirmation to Jacob, I'm with you. I'm with you. The promise that has come to Abraham, to Isaac, I'm giving to you. I find in verse 20 on page 5, then Jacob made a vow saying, listen to what he's come up with in his mind. If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then what? Then I'll believe in you. That's what I read between the lines there. I want to see you put out, God. You do this for me. Yeah, then I'll be on your side. It's a conditional agreement here. It isn't the fact, oh, God, you're taking care of me. I will follow you. No, God, you've made this promise to me. I want to see some stuff. You take care of me, I'll serve you. Yeah, prove it. Verse 29, or chapter 29. He arrives up north in Haran, and we find that in verse 4 on page 5 of chapter 29, Jacob said to them, my brothers, there was a bunch of flocks that came, but he says to a watering hole, we are from Haran. Or, my brothers, where did you come from? They said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we know him. He said to them, is it well with him? And they said, it is well. And see, what's in the distance? Rachel. Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. She's a shepherdess of all things. And he said, behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together yet. I mean, why would they be watering at this time of the day? Water the sheep and go to and pasture them. But they said, we can't until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. So, I mean, clearly Laban's sheep are very important. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone. I mean, it's almost like, I'm going to show you how strong I am. He rolls the stone away. And in verse 11, the kiss. And it's sort of a kiss of friendship, I suspect. But then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud because it's come to him. He's connecting with his family, this family that's long distance away. And as soon as Laban heard the news in verse 31, he ran to meet him, brought him to his house, and he decides that he wants Jacob to work for him. And so on page 6, we find in verse 16, Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Leah's the oldest one. Rachel's the younger. Verse 17, apparently Leah wasn't necessarily a real looker. If I'm reading that correctly, Leah's eyes were weak. I don't think that just because she probably needed glasses. But Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance, and Jacob loved Rachel. I mean, this is love at first sight. And he said, I will serve you 7 years for your daughter Rachel, which was actually a big commitment. I mean, if you literally take it 7 years, that's a long time. Because we know that when Isaac's wife was found, Rebekah, I mean, there was some gold rings and a few trinkets and stuff that were exchanged. I mean, they didn't have to work years and years to get Rebekah, did they? But Isaac is coming, or Jacob is coming with really no money. He has nothing to give to them. There's no dowry in this. And so he says, I'll work for you for 7 years. And Laban takes him up on that because I think he sees, sort of free help with Jacob. Then Jacob said and he worked for the 7 years. And in verse 20, this is sort of the love kind of thing. They seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for Rachel. I mean, the 7 years, they go by like that because I'm going to get Rachel. Verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go to her, for my time is complete. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, it wasn't Rachel that was in the tent. It was Leah. And why in the world? Either the lights were dim or he was drunk. But it wasn't until the next morning that he discovered, well, this isn't Rachel. It's just sort of the comedy of the story. And so Laban gave his female servant Zilpah, which we will know from the genealogy thing. She's one of the women that eventually he's going to sleep with and have some kids. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And so what happens is that he agrees to another 7 years, and I'll get Rachel. It's just sort of interesting how this all goes. Jacob gets deceived in keeping with essentially how he deceived his brother. He gets payback in some respects. Yep. If you look at, in verse 30, so Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Okay, through the rest of this, I've labeled, and we don't need to read it, in pages 6 and 7. You can see the kids that are born, and I numbered them, so they correspond to the order that they come. On the right-hand column on page 6, Leah has Reuben, he is the first son. Simeon, who is the second. Levi, who will be the priestly family, is number 3. Judah, that's the one that the blessing will go through. He's number 4. In chapter 30, Rachel, who is barren, wants children. And so what does she do in verse 3? She gives Jacob her servant woman. So we have a Sarah and a Hagar situation that emerges. And lo and behold, Jacob doesn't resist. He decides that he's going to have sex with her. And indeed, Bilhah has kids. Dan is number 5, Naphtali number 6 on page 7. When Leah saw, in verse 9 on top of page 7, when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant and gave her to Jacob as well. Have some kids with my servant. And indeed, Jacob does. He has Gad, who is number 7, Asher, who is number 8. And then they have this odd little moment in time in verse 14, the mandrake thing. You can read that at some point. Mandrakes are plants. They were believed to be aphrodisiacs. It's almost narcotic, I guess, that it can lead to some hallucinations. But there was this thing that, Reuben picked some mandrakes, and Rachel wanted them because maybe that would help, getting her pregnant. But whatever the case is, Jacob goes into Leah again. We have Issachar, who's kid 9, Zebulun, who's kid 10. They have a daughter, Dinah, at the bottom of page 7 there. And then finally, Rachel has a child. And that's the top of page, on the right side of page 7, Joseph, number 11. I think it's one of the reasons that Jacob loves Joseph. That takes you to the dream, to the coat of many colors, and why the brothers hated him. Because Dad likes you best. Why? Because you really loved Rachel. So he becomes very prosperous. The rest of that chapter is all about the prosperity. And what happens here at the end of chapter 30 is that there is sort of this agreement between Jacob and Laban. Jacob says, I want to go back to my family. Let me go. And Laban doesn't want to let him go. But they finally sort of get this agreement that Jacob is saying, I'll take, out of the flock, I'll take the runts, the animals that aren't very good. Rejects, yeah. And there is some trickery that goes on between Jacob and Laban. And again, it's the trickery that goes through all of this stuff. I mean, Jacob really hasn't learned his lesson. But in the end of it, he comes out as this very wealthy guy who, in the end, heads back home with 11 kids. And it's just a fascinating, I mean, when you hear the story about Esau and Jacob and all of the conniving between these two. In the end, God blesses Jacob. He has 12 sons who will eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. God's faithful to him. It's just a fascinating story. Questions or comments about it? Well, they do lie. It's like us. It's like, I mean, to me, if you were going to, if when Moses was writing the story, and it would be true, I think, for any kind of where you're making your family public, do you really want to show all the dirt? Because this isn't the kind of thing that you'd want to parade around. Oh, let me tell you about my family. Because God loves us so much. Let me tell you about my family.
If that happened today, would it be a godly family? I mean, the
Well,
same situation.
Well, Moses, I mean, why not just clean up the story? You could have cleaned this up, but you told us the dirt. That's what always fascinates about me, which actually, to me, makes the story even more believable. Because it wasn't hidden.
So, from a historical perspective, if Jacob's gone for this long in the foreign land, getting married, having all these kids, who
Well, likely Esau. Likely Esau is the one who's doing it.
Oh, okay, all right.
I mean, the brother's back there. Yeah. Well, it's possible, it's not exactly clear whether or not Isaac dies before Jacob gets back home. Most people believe that he is still alive when Jacob comes back. And then he dies. So you got about 20 years. Jacob was, again, if you take the numbers literally, Jacob is up north for about 20 years. That's a long time.
So if I'm reading chapter 29, verse 28, that Jacob completed his week with Leah, and then Laban gave his Rachel to him at that time. So Jacob had 11 kids in a 6-year period, or 7-year period.
Yes, yes. Mhm. Well, because he had really 4 women going there. Yes, yes. He had multiple places to be. Yes, yes, yes. Oh no. Yeah. Yeah, and what it would indicate is, I mean, the number 12 is important because in sort of the Jewish framework, what would be the incredible blessing that you could get? It's not necessarily money, it's sons. It's the sons. Oh, by the way, they had a daughter, but it's sons. It's sons. That's the blessing. If God was going to bless you, yeah, Jacob, you're blessed. Because that's what he prays back home to his family. Ishmael had 12. Yeah. Esau will have some kids, but we sort of lose track of Esau. Okay, it's just an interesting story.
Always thought, how could Isaac, an experienced herdsman, not know goat skin when he fell?
Well,
But
yeah.
use the belly of the goat. It's sparsely haired, it's thinner skin, and that would feel more like human skin.
Well, yeah. I mean, to me, if you can tell the difference between Jacob's voice and Esau's voice, which you apparently could, then, and he's suspicious anyway, it sounds like. You know, I don't really trust that Jacob. Are you really Esau? But it's the smell, because he's wearing his brother's clothes, and everything else seems to make some sense.
I have a feeling that's all the work for him was his sense of smell.
Yeah. Well, and his touch in some respects is sort of confirming. But it does seem as though the smell plays a big role in all of this. It's a dysfunctional family, isn't it? And it's sort of, you come down to the point, so? I mean, we have a lot of dysfunction in our families. Yeah. And God is so great that he's able to work through the dysfunction. And he gets it to the point where he wanted it to be. It's amazing. Well, we'll push on next Sunday. What does it say? Well, it probably dysfunctional family is to say we're all human. I mean, we really, all of us are sinners. These folks weren't perfect.
God just worked with what he had.
He did. I mean, it was amazing. Again, I think when you read these stories, and particularly drill down into them, and you see all of the dysfunction and all of the problems, it's saying, this isn't a whitewashed story. You see the dirt. They're sinners like us, and God doesn't give up on them. God loves them, works through the dysfunction, and gets them to where he wants them to be.